What's up, guys? Readiness Reviews here with you again. If you're into military surplus firearms at all, I'm sure you've heard of Royal Tiger Imports and some of their surplus firearm horror stories. Well, I have been adding RTI firearms to my collection for over 3 years at this point. And in this video, we're going to be doing a summary of my Royal Tiger experiences in that 3-year time span. If you've ever considered picking up a firearm from RTI, this video should give you a good idea of what you can expect to receive. And by the end, hopefully you'll be more well informed of whether or not it's worth taking the risk with Royal Tiger Imports. Before we get into it, don't forget to give the video a thumbs up if you like seeing this military surplus-centric firearms content here on YouTube. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of my future videos, and drop me a comment with ideas of future videos you'd like to see from me. So first off here, who is Royal Tiger Imports? RTI is a sister company of firearms importer Interordnance. Interordnance was lucky enough to secure a gigantic cache of firearms that were being held in Ethiopia. This epic firearms cache has a huge variety of all kinds of military firearms, dating all the way back to the 1870s and as recent as even the 1970s. Over the past several years, Interordnance has been bringing those firearms to the US from Ethiopia, and Royal Tiger Imports has been selling them. I would break down the majority of Royal Tiger Imports firearms into about 6 categories: Enfields, Carcanos, American rifles, Mannlicher rifles, French rifles, and lastly, Mausers. There are outliers that don't fall into those categories, but the majority of everything RTI has ever offered will. The Enfield rifles from Royal Tiger Imports, those rifles chambered in .303 British, have been very welcome on the US market. If it wasn't for Royal Tiger Imports offering Enfields, there would be very few new rifles entering the supply. The one major issue with Enfields from RTI, and this goes for just about everything else they offer as well, is bore condition. With any Royal Tiger Imports firearm, you can expect a rifle with a worn overall condition, but each and every individual purchase from them is a dice roll of whether or not you'll get a rifle with a shootable bore. With the .303 chambered rifle specifically, it seems like it's about a 50-50 chance of getting one with a decent bore or not. This number 4 Enfield might be my biggest RTI success story. It was purchased shortly after they began offering them, and it was in C-grade condition, which meant that it came with a pretty heavy discount. That C-grade condition comes with the downside of the rifle being in really rough shape and or simply not functioning correctly. This rifle was super dirty, but it was missing some important parts that were keeping it from functioning as it should. I covered the full restoration of this rifle here on the channel, and so you guys were along for the journey. The rifle I've ended up with here is one of my absolute favorites in my entire collection. I lucked out hugely on the bore of this rifle. It started out pretty dark and ugly, but after cleaning and shooting, it looks tons better, and this is a great shooting rifle. It also cleaned up fantastic. And so while I had a really good experience with this one, that might be the exception as opposed to the rule. In general, RTI's number 4 Enfields will be functional, but each one is such an individual that the chances of you getting a good shootable rifle is completely up in the air, and you won't know for sure until you get your hands on it. Royal Tiger Imports does help us a little bit with their grading system. They have their standard grade rifles, B grade rifles, and C-grade rifles. With a standard grade rifle, you can generally expect a firearm that is in turn-in surplus condition. They will show finish wear. They may have a very minor crack somewhere in the wood, but they will typically be functional, shootable rifles. Always keeping in mind that the bore is a flip of a coin. With your B-grade rifles, you can also generally expect a rifle that will be in functional condition. However, they will show more finish wear, and this goes for all the rifles across the entire RTI catalog. Your B grades may be missing a handguard, a sling swivel, a bayonet lug, maybe even a sight, rear, or front. The sight guards, barrel bands, butt plates, any of those parts could be missing or possibly broken, but the actual rifles themselves will generally be functional. With a C-grade rifle from RTI, you can still expect that worn external condition. They may be missing several parts. They could have large cracks in the stock that need to be fixed before the firearm will be functional. They may be missing or have broken parts that are vital for the function of the firearm, such as fire control parts or bolt parts. With a standard grade rifle, you can usually count on getting a serviceable firearm. The B grades can be worth the risk, considering that they typically come with a pretty substantial discount, but will most likely require some amount of work before they're ready for the range. With the C grade though, all bets are off the table. You can get super lucky like me and get a C grade example rifle that cleans up beautifully and only needed a couple parts changed for it to be completely functional. Or you could wind up with a C grade like this #1 Enfield that's missing a big chunk of the handguard, and I can't even get it to chamber around. Now, I do think I'll be able to put some life back into this rifle, but it's going to take some money and time. Definitely something that you need to take into consideration if you're thinking about a C grade from RTI. On the other hand, this B grade #1 Enfield was very heavily worn, including the bore, but turned out to be a decent functioning rifle, and I definitely think it was worth the $300 that I paid for it. Their P14 Enfields are pretty expensive guns. I think their standard pricing on these is somewhere in that $700 to $800 range. They have offered these as B grades though, which is what this rifle is, for as low as $500. This rifle certainly has its issues, but for that kind of price, I think it's worth investing the time to bring it up to speed. But as we discussed earlier, with any .303 chambered rifle coming from RTI, the chance of a good bore is about a 50-50. So regardless of grade, there is risk associated with picking up an RTI P14. Like the Enfields, RTI's Carcano offerings have been a very welcome injection into the arm of the US Milsurp market. They offer a huge variety of Carcanos, and the prices are generally pretty decent. I've had pretty bad luck with Royal Tiger Carcanos though. My M38 here is so shot out that there is virtually no rifling left in the bore at all. And this Fusilli 1891 long rifle isn't much better. The muzzle is so worn that it keyholes every round that I send through it. And both of these rifles were standard grade examples. They were not B grade or C grade. I just got really unlucky. With any of RTI's M38 Carcanos, the ones chambered in 7.35, I'm going to say your chances of getting a bad bore are actually pretty high from what I've seen from other people. Their Carcanos chambered in 6.5 though seem to have a higher likelihood of getting a bore that's at least shootable, but admittedly it's still a roll with the dice. One Carcano variant that you can pretty much bet on being decent from Royal Tiger Imports though is their M91 Mosquetos, chambered in 6.5 Carcano. These Mosqueto Carcanos, with their folding bayonet, are different from most of the other firearms RTI has because these rifles are not coming from Ethiopia, so they didn't see that really hard use that the other rifles did. Their Mosquetos were imported from Italy. For the most part, these rifles have been in deep storage ever since just after World War II. The prices on RTI's M91 carbines have been as low as $100 for a B-grade example, and they go up to about $200 for examples that are in good to very good condition. Even with the B-grade examples of these rifles, it seems like they come with a bore that's generally in shooting condition, and the overall external condition of these rifles are far nicer than the average rifles that RTI is offering. So if you're asking me if buying a rifle from RTI is worth the risk, if nothing else, I do recommend the M91 Carcanos. They seem to be pretty solid. Now, the American rifles from Royal Tiger Imports are pretty interesting. Just the fact that so many American Milsurps were in that part of the world is a little bit odd to me, but I sure am glad that Inner Ordnance was able to bring these firearms back to the US. RTI has offered M1 Garands, M1917s, and M1 carbines. I've never rolled the dice on one of their M1 Garands, simply because I think they are too expensive for the risk. When those rifles were first coming in, I was looking at reviews, people were sending me their experiences with them, and they were pretty hit or miss on overall condition and even bore condition. Although it does seem like the American firearms from Royal Tiger Imports are typically a bit nicer than some of their firearms from other countries. It's the same story with the M1917. I think the price on those is a bit too high to risk what kind of condition you might get from Royal Tiger Imports on those rifles. And for the M1917 and the M1 Garand, we have the resource of the CMP here in the United States, and I would much rather risk a rack grade or a field grade from the CMP than I would one of the rifles coming back from Ethiopia. Aside from my C grade #4 Enfield, this M1 carbine has been the biggest win I've had from RTI. Period. I picked up this Inland M1 back when these rifles were very first being offered. I caught it on sale for just over $800, which at the time felt like a lot of money. But in those 2.5 to 3 years that I've had this gun, the price on M1 carbines has exploded, and now they're regularly more than $1,000. This rifle came a little bit dirty, but overall is in beautiful condition. There was no major issues with it whatsoever, and the bore on this rifle is shiny and beautiful. It is a fantastic shooting rifle. The M1 carbines from Royal Tiger Imports have been a pretty good gun to roll the dice on because the 30 carbine chambering of these rifles has always been non-corrosive. So even if these rifles were maintained at the same substandard standard of the other rifles in Ethiopia, the bores didn't degrade nearly as bad because the ammo was not corrosive. Unfortunately, RTI has gone up on the price on these in the past couple years, so they're not the screaming deal that they were when I got mine, but the M1 carbines from RTI are probably the nicest firearm that they've ever offered. Royal Tiger has been about the only game in town for newly imported Mannlicher straight pull style rifles here on the US market in quite a while. They have a really good selection of both rifles and carbines. Condition on these, however, is usually pretty poor. These rifles spent a very long time in Ethiopia. Most of them were there from just after World War I up until here recently. So we're talking like 100 years in some cases, and they definitely show that age. The biggest concern with these rifles, though, is actually ammo related. RTI has offered M95 carbines chambered in 8x56R, which is a cartridge that you can still buy today, but the majority of RTI's Mannlicher rifles are chambered in the basically extinct 8x50R cartridge. There is virtually no new manufacturer for that ammo. In fact, I've been hunting that ammo for more than 2 years now, and I have yet to be able to secure a single box of it. I'm really hoping that a company like Bannerman or Steinel will decide to start loading 8x50 so I can finally get these rifles out to the range. I've bought both B grade and standard grade Mannlicher rifles from RTI. On their B grade examples, expect a rifle heavily worn with pretty messed up stocks. With your standard grades, you'll typically get a functional rifle with nothing major wrong, but even they may be missing a little bit of hardware or have cosmetic defects. The bore on these rifles range from absolutely terrible to serviceable. So like most everything else we've talked about, the bore condition is always up to chance. I will say RTI aggressively prices these. They are inexpensive guns and they come with a huge amount of history. So for no other reason, I do recommend picking these up just to have a World War I historic piece in your collection, if nothing else. I was super excited when they announced that they were going to start bringing in French rifles. It took me a little while to get around to it, but I did finally pick up one of their 1886 Lebels when they ran a sale on B-grade examples. Now I have a full deep dive video on this particular rifle. I'll link it right here for you if you want to check that out. From my experiences with this rifle and what I've heard from you guys, RTI's rifles chambered in 8mm Lebel have a pretty good chance of having a decent bore. That goes for the Lebels and the Berthiers. I've had plenty of you guys send me pictures of the rifles you got from them, and usually the bore on these is actually pretty decent. Of course, they're going to have all those other little RTI things, like the receiver being wire-wheeled and just covered in dings and dents. The Lebels especially have been known to have some broken parts on the inside, which can be very difficult to replace, and these are not cheap rifles, even from RTI. So if you're considering a Lebel specifically, keep in mind you're taking on a lot of risk, but personally, I am happy with how mine turned out, and I'm glad I rolled the dice on this gun. Now, I haven't bought a Berthier from RTI, but I've come really close a couple times. From what I've heard from others, though, the Berthiers seem to be decent guns. However, I think they're priced a little bit too high. While we're talking French rifles, I will mention the MAS 4956 rifles that RTI has. That's another one that I haven't picked up myself, but I've had a lot of guys show me their examples, and it seems like the bores in the MAS 4956s are usually pretty decent, and overall, those rifles seem pretty good, even coming from RTI. They also have several different Gras rifles. These are some of the oldest firearms in the RTI inventory. They go on sale for cheap, but they have all your standard issues, stock problems, ugly exterior, and like most black powder rifles over 100 years old, the bores are usually pretty ugly. Something that a lot of people are not aware of is how many inter-ordnance imported rifles are being sold by other firearms retailers. Classic Firearms and Atlantic Firearms are two examples of companies that are selling rifles imported by RTI. This number 5 Enfield Jungle Carbine was purchased from Classic Firearms, but it was imported by Inter-Ordnance. So this is a Royal Tiger Imports gun, even though I didn't buy it from RTI. My VZ52 was the exact same story. And on this gun and that one, they had all those characteristic RTI traits of being heavily worn and used. So just keep in mind, even if you're not buying your Milsurp straight from Royal Tiger Imports, you might still be buying a Royal Tiger Imports gun, depending on what it is, of course. Our last main section that I mentioned earlier was Mausers, and this is one grouping that I have not made a single purchase of, and the reason for that is because it seems like all the firearms from RTI that are chambered in 8mm Mauser have a very high chance of having a bad bore. We're talking over 50%. They have an awesome variety of Mausers and other firearms chambered in 8mm. They've had German Gewehr 98s from World War I, Kar 98Ks from World War II, various Yugoslavian Mausers, Czech Mausers, really a huge variety. But one thing that all those Mausers have in common is that I've heard more bad things about their bores than basically any other firearm RTI offers. And the only thing I can attribute that to is perhaps 8mm ammo was easier for the Ethiopians to get their hands on, and so those rifles saw a lot more use than some of the others. One rifle from RTI that I've wanted to pick up for a very long time is the Egyptian Hakim rifles that they have, but the fact that the Hakims are chambered in 8mm has kept me from doing so ever since they became available. For that particular rifle, I want to find one on the secondary market that I can inspect myself before buying to make sure that I get one that's in good shooting condition, and that's something that I might recommend for every firearm we've talked about today. Sure, RTI is offering an awesome variety of firearms, and I'm glad they're offering that huge variety of firearms. It's given a lot of people an outlet to start collecting at reasonable prices. But if there's a very specific gun that you want to add to your collection, I would say in almost every situation, it would be better for you to hunt one down on the secondary market, to know exactly what you're buying, to make sure you get the firearm in the condition that you want, instead of rolling the dice with RTI. And that certainly goes for the higher value guns. For RTI's deals that are sub $300, I say go for it if that's money that you're willing to lose. But when we're talking about these big purchases, $600 to $1,000 or maybe even more, I would be sweating big time on those. So that's been my personal experiences of 3 years of buying from Royal Tiger Imports. Keep in mind that I have absolutely no affiliation with RTI whatsoever. They've never given me anything or paid me for anything. They just offer some products that I'm greatly interested in, and so I've made a lot of purchases from them. I want to know what your guys' RTI experiences are down in the comments of this video. If you've made more than a few transactions with them, I'm sure you have both good and bad, same as me, and I want to hear about it. If you enjoyed this video or found it at all helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. That helps it out with the algorithm and getting it distributed out to other viewers. And gun content needs all the help it can get with that. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of my future firearms content, and no doubt more unboxing videos from Royal Tiger Imports. Best of luck in your Milsurp hunting, and I will catch you guys in the next video. See you then. Peace.